about working in cross-media and transmedia from a documentary filmmaker's point of view is that it actually fundamentally challenges the way you go about putting together the arguments or the content for documentary. Once you move away from the idea of linear presentation, it shifts things on a very profound level. Firstly, it shifts the idea of the primacy of a single argument into the idea of multiplicity of arguments that can be presented. It allows you to bring in and make use of the vast research materials, and I'm thinking in particular of primary source materials, so original letters, original documentation, original interviews and so on, that by and large are filtered down in linear media just to the absolute tip of the iceberg, and then the vast bulk ends up sitting in your archive room, absolutely useless to anybody. Well, in fact, this turns that completely on its head, and that's not to say you're just loading up your website with a whole lot of extraneous material. It means that you're thinking about how you can arrange that material and, more importantly, access to that material for your audience and your users so that they can not only read, see, hear, but they can be engaged in a critical level with the arguments that might sit within that content. So an example of that is William Bligh. We're setting out to tell a story that somehow challenges the mythology that William Bligh was a rogue captain and a cruel and terrible ruler of men at sea, such to the extent that his crew mutinied. So what we did was present not only a narrative that countered that in the work, and we supported that narrative by original materials where we invite the audience to come in and make their own judgment about Bligh. And how do they do that? Well, they now get access and look at the original records, the original ship's logs that show the number of floggings, for instance, on board any of Bligh's ships. And you find, in fact, that the record on his ships were in fact much, much lower than what was the common norm for the British Navy at the time. So you get the audience to present that. The audience finds that information, and it does shift, I suppose, the idea that you as the documentary filmmaker have the narrative that is being delivered or consumed by the audience into much more of an active engagement. And that starts to get exciting. Also allows you to have multiplicity of viewpoints, and for audiences to really appreciate that and enjoy that aspect of it. I see it as incredibly important for producers to start to engage with this space, precisely because we are entering, and very shortly will enter, a very high-speed broadband-enabled world, particularly here in Australia through the introduction of the NBN. And there is going to be extraordinary demand for content that is transmedia or cross-platform. There is already a lot of stress right now on the business models for old media because they're not working in the same way that they have been for years. That is, the advertisers are not supporting television broadcasts in the same way. Audiences themselves, and we're all audiences, we know how we consume media. It's not in a linear one screen or two screen format. We're constantly moving cross-platform ourselves in the way that we consume media. So we're having to develop content really that meets audiences' changed expectations of what that kind of content should be, but changed expectations of how they want to relate to it. And the two things that we know really, really strongly is that audiences and users love contributing and putting up their own content, so that becomes important for us as content producers to think of a two-way conversation now and not just a one-way presentation. And then secondly, that audiences are not going to watch content at somebody else's schedule. they absolutely want to control what they watch and when they watch it. And so that flexibility in distribution and downloads and so on is absolutely central to the audience experience. Now, we as producers, we absolutely need to come to terms with that. We know that there's going to be a massive demand, and we're facing right now that the real scenario is if we don't engage with this area and get up to speed with delivering content online, then audiences will clearly be getting that content from overseas. And that will happen anyway. There is no regulation at all for content that comes online, unlike the quotas that operate for television. So the only way that we can make an impact with Australian produced content is if we start getting into that area and producing quality content that meets audience expectations and challenges them and excites them. I think this will change in time. Right at the moment, I see that there are parallel cultures. There's a kind of a digital native, digital media culture, and then there's the film and TV culture. And by and large, there's not a massive amount of dialogue. There are very few people who are working jointly in both spaces. But I think this will definitely change with time. And in part because there's the recognition that we need each other, absolutely need each other. The storytelling skills and skills of reaching audience and so on that traditional film and TV makers have are very, very important, as indeed the tools that digital media developers and so on have in working with new platforms and new technology. So we need each other, but more importantly, I think as we work together more and we understand that yes, there are different models and different practices, we're going to need new positions and new training that will help this process in the future. And right at the moment, one of the most critical roles is one that's not even really properly identified yet, and it's certainly not built into the training regimes in any real way. And that is the role of the digital media producer or the production manager who sits in the middle of the dialogue between the developers and the writer, director, producer. The person who is not just a management person but has high-level conceptual skills that understand and is engaged with the underlying work and the vision and the intention. They get it, but they also understand programming language, they understand the schedules, the scoping documents, the very rigorous requirements of developing media for online. So we need those communicators, those translators, and the more people, and there are very good people emerging into this space now, I think they will actually really help bridge this parallel universes that seem to be existing at the moment. One of the challenges of working across platforms and in a transmedia environment for a producer is, once having developed and delivered the work, is that it's almost like having to do multiple marketing strategies, because every platform has its own strategy really for reaching its audience. So your job as a producer actually multiplies by the number of platforms that you've got. You can't apply the same publicity and media strategy across to each platform. So that is one of the very real challenges. And the other very real challenge is who's going to pay for this content? Who's going to finance it? Because you tend to find, again, that when you pitch a transmedia work to any given finance partner, they tend to be interested in one aspect of it. So the broadcasters, by and large, will be interested in the television airing, free-to-air component of what it is that you're pitching, and not so interested necessarily in the online if you're going up through the television department. Equally, if you go up through the online department, well, that's what they want to go focus on, is the mobile app or the website app, and not so much the television. If you go to radio, well, they're not interested in either. So you can get caught out that you're trying to present a transmedia idea, but you're dealing with multiple silos. And that can be really, really frustrating, because what happens is invariably your budget gets nibbled away as people only want to focus on their areas and see the rest is extraneous, when what it is, you're trying to argue that in fact it's a coherent whole. You're building ground up a transmedia experience. That is a real challenge, and it happens at the beginning of the project when you're financing, and then it happens again at the end when you come to promote. Because theoretically, you should have fabulous cross-promotional activities between the different platforms. So television should cross-promote, website online should cross-promote, mobile, etc. But again, you find you might be dealing with publicity departments who only understand their silo, and they relegate the entire website experience to a single URL at the bottom of a press release. This sort of stuff happens. So again, it's transition, it will take time, but we need to grapple with this if we're going to be active players in a national broadband network-enabled environment with high speeds and high expectations from audiences of online content.